Hello and welcome to the Screenplay Lab. I'm your host, Jeff Parker. I'm a screenwriter. And on this podcast, we break down screenplays. We've been doing it a little differently recently. We used to try to break down the whole screenplay and talk about it in broad strokes. Now I'm trying, from a matter of workflow and not cut into my own writing life, be a little more specific. So we're going to do the first 4 pages of this screenplay and the last 3 pages. And today, this week, our screenplay is Train Dreams by Clint Bentley and Greg Kwedar. And this was one of my favorite movies of 2025. I just fell in love with this movie so much. Made me cry, made my heart race. It was so visually stunning. And I couldn't wait to see the screenplay and see if the writing would live up to what I saw on the screen. And it certainly does. And there's a lot to learn from this screenplay, things you can take from it, appreciate it, give it a big hug. So we're going to look at that today. It's based on the book by Denis Johnson, which was originally a short story in 2002 that was published in the Paris Review, one of the largest, and by largest I mean most prestigious literary journals. And then it was developed into a novella in 2011, and it was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in fiction that year. So this story has some meat on it. And the writer, Denis Johnson, passed away in 2017 from liver cancer, but he was a prolific writer with a lot of novellas, short stories, novels that are just highly regarded. So a goldmine for adaptation, and a lot of his stuff has already been adapted. This is the latest. Clint Bentley directed this film, and as I said, he co-wrote it with his partner Greg Kwedar. They do a lot of projects together, including Sing Sing. On that one, it was reverse, where Greg was the director, but they both wrote that screenplay, and that one was nominated for an Academy Award for screenwriting, and so was this one. So they now have 2 Oscar nominations for screenwriting. So let's see what that's all about. Here we go, page 1, Over Black. So you used to see this all the time. Now you don't see it as much, but here it is, old school screenwriting, Over Black, where we're going to start with either a noise or a voice. In this case, it's the voice of the narrator. And that is what makes this screenplay so interesting, is that the narrator has such a presence in this story and in this screenplay. So if you want to have a narrator in your screenplay, this is a great one to read to get an idea of how you can incorporate having a narrator and done in a way that is not intrusive, that doesn't overtell, overshare, that doesn't put a hat on a hat, as we call it, where you say something and then show it, or show it and then say it. So they do a really good job of that. The narrator starts here with a voiceover, so you get the VO, obviously. There were once passages to the old world. That's the beginning of the screenplay, Over Black, and then we begin a montage. And this is an interesting way to start a screenplay. It makes me wonder if this is a slug line or a mini slug, how you would define this, because you wouldn't normally start a screenplay in this way. They do bold and underline all of their slugs, and they bold and underline begin montage, but they also add a period. And we'll bring this up a little bit later to see why we have questions about that. But we begin with the montage, and it says, a forgotten train tunnel through a mountain. If you'll notice, this sentence has no verb, and this is common writing for our screenwriters here, at least when one of them is leading the way. And I can pick out different writing styles coming and going in this screenplay. And I think this is something that, sometimes when you have 2 or 3 people writing on a screenplay, you can't tell. It's in one voice consistently. This one I can see, I don't know who's who, and I don't always notice it, but sometimes I can notice a different writing voice, a different writing style. what we see at the beginning of the screenplay here is different than what we see on page like 3 and 4, and certainly different from what we see at the very end of the screenplay. All right, so we're into this montage, and the narrator takes over and says, "Strange trails, hidden paths. You turn a corner and suddenly find yourself face to face with the great mystery, the foundation of all things." So we're setting up these themes for this screenplay, for this film. Then we go into a list, and it's 4 action lines. They're all 1 sentence long, well, 1 line long, and they give us an idea of what we would be seeing on screen. It says, "We see abandoned railroads." We see. Broken and overgrown. Old boots nailed to trees in forgotten forest. Roads overcrowded with brambles. Ruins of some logging mill left to rot. So 1, 2, 3, 4, they give us these images. Bang, bang, bang. Then the narrator continues with the voiceover. "And even though that old world is gone now, even though it's been rolled up like a scroll and put somewhere, you can still feel the echo of it." So we have some similes here, like being one, and that's a little more forgiving in the narration because you're hearing that as a viewer rather than reading it. Although there's quite a bit of metaphor and simile in the screenplay, but it makes sense because of the type of story that it is. I mean, this is a broad story. The whole thing is about one person's life from childhood to death and what that really means to be human. That in itself is a metaphor. Then we get our first full slug heading here: exterior, primeval forest, day. And the camera, it says, "Camera is attached to a tree." When I first read this, I bumped on it a little bit and I was like, are they talking about there's a camera in a tree? Camera on a tree? I remembered that scene in the movie, with this remarkable scene where you're looking up the tree from this view, and the tree, huge tree. I mean, 200 feet maybe, I'll say. I don't know. This thing comes crashing down through the forest and you ride it all the way down. And it's described this way: "Camera is attached to a tree, looking up the length of it as the crown sways in the breeze. Then the tree trembles, lists, and starts to fall. The tree crashes spectacularly onto the forest floor, a giant fallen among tiny men." So some things to unpack here. First, want to give a shout out to the director of photography, Adolfo Veloso. He works quite a bit with these gentlemen on their projects, but he's getting huge praise for this film, and rightfully so. It's remarkable cinematography. But some things to point out also: the camera, they don't shy away from specifically talking about shots. So that's the takeaway that you can have from the screenplay. They often use setup words like "then," "starts to." They ease, they hedge, they ease into things. This is part of their writing voice. Here they say the tree crashes in all caps. So they often use all caps for sound design, which is common. They don't shy away from adverbs, although they don't use them a lot. But when they do use them, I think they're good ones, like "spectacularly" is a mouthful, but it's an okay adverb. And "a giant fallen among tiny men." This contributes to the story in no way other than as a reader, it gives you an idea of how big this tree is and how small the men are in scale. So I take it back. It is a helpful sentence, but it's a grandiose purple sentence. So there's a lot of those in there. And again, it fits for this type of story. The woodsman. So now we're talking about characters. They elect to not go all caps in the beginning here with some of these characters, only using it for speaking characters, but that's not always the case, just here in the beginning. The woodsmen climb onto the tree with axes to lop off the limbs. Others, also not capitalized, take to sawing the giant into sections. men of all colors and persuasions. Robert Grainer, that's our main character. Robert Grainer, in his 30s now, is among them. In his 30s now is set off by double dashes, so this is a clause in the middle of a sentence. And also of note is how they say in his 30s now. Usually when you introduce a character for the first time, they are the age they are, and then we work off of that, whether we go forward in time, back in time. But here we're saying this is his current age now, and I believe it's because his age changes so much throughout the story that we want to make it clear that this is the beginning point, and this is where we're at now. Bearded, period. Sweat drenched, period. Covered in sap, period. You see that type of writing, that very purpose driven, sparse. I mean, I love it. That's how I write. So it really resonates with me. Some people don't like this type of writing, but it bothers them. That's fine. But I wanted to point it out because you'll see later it changes. They don't go to this as much. But right here, bearded, sweat drenched, covered in sap. They work, period. So you have a whole action line here. One sentence, they bring it down after they've introduced them, and they just say, they worked, period. Page 2, Grainer and another man, not capitalized, yoke the section trees into a horse team. Now, a horse team is in all caps, to drag the logs down the mountainside. And our first bit of dialogue that's not from the narrator comes from a logger. So he's probably one of these people that was mentioned before, and it's off camera. And it says, look out. And they really want this person, this actor, to give this line some gusto, because look out has the old exclamation point, which some screenwriters shy away from or use sparingly. And look out is in all caps. So this person better look out, right? Another tree crashes down among them. Well, no wonder. They needed to look out. Then we go to exterior primeval forest night. So we're in the same location, but later. And this is something that you may come across in your screenwriting when you're like, I'm in the same location and it's later. Should I say later? Should I say night? I mean, what should I do? There are no answers for this. But I would say for me, since the time of day changed, I would indicate that. I would say night. If it was just later, but nothing had changed, I would say later. In fact, I would just put later. I wouldn't even put exterior primeval forest. But there's a lot of ways to do it. The mountainside is dotted with small campfires, double dash, each surrounded by a few loggers getting warm. The sky above them filled with too many stars to arrange into constellations. Here's another example of, they've left off the to be verb here, is. More commonly, it would be the sky above them is filled with too many stars to arrange into constellations. But here they go, the sky above them filled with too many stars. It adds some urgency. Grainer sits at one of these fires, a little apart from the other loggers, all laughing and talking in at least 3 different languages. Now we have a mouthful sentence. This is different from what we were seeing before. It has a clause in the middle of it. Grainer sits at one of these fires, comma, a little apart from the other loggers, comma. So you could take that whole thing out. But they wanted to have some stage direction here, show you where he's at. And so you can see the writing voice changing a little bit. Narrator. His name was Robert Grainer, and he lived more than 80 years in and around the town of Bonners Ferry, Idaho. In his time, he traveled west to within a few dozen miles of the Pacific, though he'd never seen the ocean itself, and as far east as the town of Libby, 40 miles inside Montana. So that is a pretty cool way to describe someone. You're not only describing a person, you're describing a whole lifestyle and a whole way of living. This person, I mean, could you imagine? I mean, this wasn't that long ago. What was this? I don't even really know. 1900s. It was maybe after the First World War. I'm not really sure. I used to know. But anyway, it was not that long ago. And this guy, he only traveled a short distance. Could you imagine in your life if you'd only gone 40 miles one direction, 20 miles the other direction? Grainer watches the men talk, his eyes getting sleepy. And then we see memories of his life now in snatches. And I like the way they say in snatches. If you're always trying to come up with a unique and different way of saying series of images, without trying to sound too technical, snatches, hey, I've never seen that before. I like it. It's in all caps. So sort of how you would do a montage, or one way you would format a montage. And then we get a list. So you see here I've numbered, and it goes to 5. So each one of these snatches is its own scene, its own time in space, its own time on the page, its own scene, its own setup. Number 1, interior train day. Grainer, as a young boy, 7. So he's 7 now. Riding a train with a note pinned to his chest that reads, Fry, Idaho. So we have a little boy on a train with a note on his chest that says Fry, Idaho. Narrator says, when he was sent by himself to the town of Fry, Idaho, he was 6 or possibly 7. This is one of the few times that they point out directly what we're seeing on the screen. But there's still value in it because I like here how they use the uncertainty. Was he 6? Was he 7? I mean, us as the narrator of the story would know that. This person would know that. But by him not knowing it, it grounds the story that back then you just didn't always know so much about yourself. And we'll find out why he doesn't know so much about himself here in a minute. Then we go to the next snatch. Number 2, exterior, riverside, day. A 9-foot sturgeon hangs from a pole. People gather around it in awe. 9-foot sturgeon is in all caps. And in this is the time now where the narrator is going to speak, and they choose not to address what we're seeing on the screen. So now we've deviated, and the screen is going to show us one story and tell us one thing, and the narrator is going to give us more information. That has nothing to do with that. The narrator says, he never knew for sure the year or day of his birth. So there's more of that uncertainty. We like that. Snatch number 3, interior barn, night. As a boy, he watches as a 2-headed calf standing in a stall takes stock of this world and of this world it's come into. Okay. So what I just did then, I've read this now, read it 3 times now, and I still bumped on it because you are at risk when you start putting clauses, when you give the reader too much to consume at once. It's not like prose where you have these long, complicated sentences and you're just sort of leisurely going through it. In screenwriting, it's all about getting through the story and what you're experiencing in the reader's experiencing in their head, putting together their movie in their head, not the movie you have, but their movie, giving them as much information so that they can most easily get to that image in their mind. And when you have things that you have to hold on to and come back to in a sentence, you're not going forward, you're going back and forth. And I'm not being critical at all. I'm just pointing out the change from earlier when it was like, he did this, this happened, he looked like this. Now we get as a boy, comma, he watches as a 2-headed calf, comma, standing in a stall, comma, takes stock of this world it's come into. So take what you want of that. Narrator, and we're getting a lot of info on this piece of narration, says how he had lost his original parents, nobody ever told him. So now we know, okay, he doesn't have his original parents and he doesn't know so much about himself. So they didn't always tell him everything. Snatch 4, interior general store / Bonner's Ferry Day. So here they've elected in the scene heading to use a slash rather than a dash. Not as conventional, but you do see it. No big deal. Still a boy, comma. He stands next to his adopted mother at the counter. Commotion erupts outside on the street. I really like that verb, erupts. That's a strong verb. And this is the opposite style of what we saw last time we were together and we went over Project Hail Mary. In that screenplay, Drew Goddard would often write his action lines like the scene headings didn't exist. So that, because often readers will just skip the scene headings. And he wanted to make sure, for clarity, especially in a scientific piece like Project Hail Mary, that everyone knew where they were and what was going on. I think it was brilliant. But for some people, it'd be like, okay, you just said we were in the cockpit, and then you immediately start the scene, the action line with he's in the cockpit. See what I'm saying? Like saying it twice. Here, that doesn't happen. We get that he's at the counter, and if you don't know the scene heading, you don't know what counter. What are we talking about? But so you have to pay attention to the scene headers here. General store in the town of Bonner's Ferry. Now it makes sense that he's at a counter with his mother. Narrator says, one of his earliest memories was that of observing the mass deportation of 100 or more Chinese families from the town. So here, now we're coming back to the narrator talking about what we're seeing on the screen. And then this action line confuses me some. I just don't really get it. It says, they scarcely mark it before two men with bats burst into the store, grab a Chinese family, and take them outside. I was going back trying to say, is market something that is common and I just have missed it in all the hundreds of screenplays I've read? I don't think that's the case. Clock it, I thought maybe they meant clock it, scarcely mark it. It just went over my head. And so I'm sure there's a great explanation for it, but it's not going to hit everyone because it didn't hit me. I was trying to figure out, was there some other line there they took out? Were they marking something? But either way, you get the main point of this is that they were doing something, they barely got it done, and then the two men, called all caps, burst into the store, grab the Chinese family, all caps, and take them outside. Narrator says, Grainer was baffled by the casualness of the violence. And this is one of the themes of this film. They lined them up with two other Chinese families on the sidewalk, guarded by men with guns and clubs, to be expelled from town. So again, we're getting into these clauses that you have to remember what you were thinking about and come back to it. It's set off by the double dashes, guarded by men with guns and clubs. But it is providing, some information for the people who are going to make this movie, which is one of the screenwriters here. And then snatch number 5. So we're going through these periods in life. We get to the final one, exterior Moya River morning years later. And I find it interesting. I'll just point it out here. They put years later on this one. All of these snatches were years later, but they didn't do it that time. So just a choice. Grainer, now 17, is fishing alone in the Moya River. So, okay, so I just went on this whole thing about how they're not really putting stuff in the action lines that are in the scene headings, and then they immediately do it. They do say here, he's fishing in the Moya River, and we have exterior Moya River. So, doesn't matter. Either way, I'm just pointing things out. Now 17 is set off by double dashes on each side, which is, not as conventional. There are other ways that we do it. And again, it's the now because his age is shifting rather than just putting 17, although previously they put 7, I believe. The quiet is broken by a strange sound, a groaning in the trees, groaning in all caps, good sound design. And now we get back to that punchy writing. Grainer stops, listens, then hears it again. Those were 3 sentences. Grainer stops, period, listens, period, then hears it again. Grainer walks up the bank, carrying his pole, gets closer to the sound, and finally sees the source. A figure, all caps, is laid up among some birches in a sloppy camp, nursing an injured leg. Here we have a comma that kind of slows things down that may not be necessary, but that doesn't matter. A boomer. Okay, boomer. No, not that kind of boomer. A boomer, as his sort was known in those days. And so I was like, okay, I never heard that before. But a boomer is a rail worker that goes town to town and, is sort of like all over the place. So it's not how we use the term. So, it's all a matter of clarity. You don't want the reader to be confused in any way. I think at this point we've set up that this was a long time ago, and then they double down and say, as was known in those times. So it's like, oh, okay, obviously, if you don't know the term, it meant something. But it gives Boomer a name, and his name here is Boomer. It's not Boomer in the novella. I forget his name in the novella, Finley or something. Come on up here, please, young feller, he says. And now, since he's addressed him as young feller, they switch over and start calling Grainer young Grainer. A little bit. They go back and forth. Young Grainer drops his fishing pole at the sight. The boomer sits against a tree, his leg out straight, barefoot, his old shoes on either side of him. We got the double dash here in the middle of that sentence. He is bearded and streaked with dust. Bits of the woods cling to him everywhere. He gives the impression of a mouth hole moving in a stack of leaves and rags and matted brown hair. So before we had extra commas that you didn't really need, that they were using to slow down pacing. Here they forego commas to keep it moving. He gives the impression of a mouth hole moving in a stack of leaves and rags and matted brown hair, no comma. We just keep going. Then we get a whole new line, and it just says, Grainer is paralyzed. So they write in beats, mostly, not all the time, but mostly they write in camera direction, like we're going to shoot this, and then the next paragraph is this. And this is how you teach people to read your screenplay, and you teach them how to produce the movie in their head. When they see a line that says Grainer is paralyzed and that's it, they picture that in their head. They picture that close shot of his face and his mouth twitching, and he's doesn't know what he's stunned. A different writer would have described what he was doing physically rather than say he was paralyzed. But this is what they did. Boomer continues, I've been cut behind the knee by this feller they called Big Ear Al. I bet Al had some big ears. Like, seriously. His words came out labored. So they didn't put that in the parenthetical. In fact, I don't think I saw any parentheticals in this whole screenplay. I could be wrong, but that's fun to see. That's something different. I just caught that. But they do describe how lines are delivered in action lines just like this. Boomer says, and I have to say, I know he's killed me. And that's good dialogue. I like that. I like the way that's written. And if you haven't noticed so far, we're on page 4, and Grainer we don't have a line of dialogue yet with him. And I know this was on purpose, because I know these professionals were writing everything on purpose here. They didn't want us to hear his voice until he was in real time, which starts on page 5. So we're getting close. But we're getting the story from Grainer's face. He's paralyzed, he's stunned. We see the impact of this story on Grainer's face. So it tells us again. So he's breaking up the dialogue with these action lines that you could throw away. But like I said, without any dialogue from Grainer, why not? There were other memories that he pushed from his mind anytime they arose. Now that's interesting to put that in there, and then you'll see in a minute we're going to continue with this interaction with this feller that's just a mouth hole in the ground. Instead of moving that down at the end, like, okay, we're done with this snatch and we're moving on to the next thing, they put it up there. So why did they do that? One reason they may have done that was just to kind of give pause, so you're not too lost in this one snatch, because of all the snatches, this is the snatchiest. This one's like getting longer. An interesting thing, well, I'll tell you what, I'll read some more and then I'll tell you more about this scene. So now we're getting to the first time where we see a lot of words to describe very little. And this is where I can clearly see two people writing the screenplay. Because it would be unlikely that one person would write with these 1 and 2 word sentences that are so punchy, and it's not a thriller where somebody's running through their garage or whatever. And then write this. For a few minutes, the dying boomer stopped talking. He puts his hands to the ground either side of him and seems to want to shift his posture, but has no strength. He can't seem to get a decent breath in his lungs, panting and wheezing. So it's good writing, but it's wordy. I mean, you literally could take more than half of those words out and still describe with clarity exactly what was going on there. So I hope you see the two different styles. He closes his eyes and stops struggling for air. Moments later, so this could be a mini slug. It kind of is. It's in all caps and it has a period. This is what I was talking about earlier, how the first slug, if that's what it was, at the beginning of the screenplay was just like this, except it was in bold. So what's going on here? I don't know. But they said moments later, period, all caps. Young Grainer gives the dying man a drink of water from his own boot. And this is where we get a good taste of the theme of this screenplay and this film, talking about morality and sin and mercy. Not only the mercy that we give to other people, but the mercy that we give to ourselves so that we can get through this journey. In the book, this scene is expanded. The man is talking to Grainer and he admits a horrible, horrible sin that he committed against his niece. And this is a pivotal moment in Grainer's life. And he has to decide what he's going to do with it. And he decides that this person is still a human, and he gives him water. And he has nothing to give him water with except his own shoe. And you can imagine in this time and day how important it would be to have dry shoes. So I think it's a very powerful scene. And they elected to leave that out. And I can understand why, because I'm afraid to even say it on YouTube and on a podcast. But when I say sin against his niece, you know what I'm talking about. So they elected to not give us the full edge of this scene, but it still does some important things. It still shows that this kid has seen a lot in his many years, and he's seen some morally dubious things, and he's going to internalize all that, and it's beginning to set up what he has to work through in his own life. The dying man finishes, nods, and Grainer starts walking away through the woods. And we get our narrator friend again, who jumps in and says, he quit attending school in his early teens, and the next 2 decades passed without much direction or purpose. How much of him quitting school had to do with the trauma that he'd experienced, and how much of it was just social, like boys weren't expected to be that smart and literate, and he needed to get out and go work and sweat, do something. I don't know. That's left up to us to figure out. Young Grainer starts walking faster, now running. And the soft harmonies of a little church choir seep into the space. Now we've got this audio transition, this cinematic writing, which I love so much. Love transitions. And when you read this, you can see the movie in your head. These are the tricks. These are the ways to get people to say, wow, this is a good screenplay. because in their mind, they started hearing church music, and then when they start reading, it overlays until the next scene. And the next scene is interior Methodist church years later. And we still have the narrator. But eventually we get to good old Grainer and get to hear his voice. I loved this movie. All right, so let's go down to the final 3 pages of the screenplay. Page 96, 97, and 98. 98-page screenplay with a tremendous amount of white space, big margins. You know, there's just not a lot of dialogue. I mean, I think that has a lot to do with it. We have our narrator taking us through the story. We certainly have dialogue from the characters as we get going, but not as much dialogue as you would see in a lot of screenplays. So, all right. Interior biplane moments later. So if you've seen the film, and you probably have if you're going to be with me here for the end of the screenplay, he's in a plane. And it's a really beautiful scene. Now, what I think is important to look at in these final 3 pages is how indulgent the writing is. And I don't mean that in a critical way at all, but some would say they've earned it at this point. You've read the screenplay all the way to the last 3 pages. You liked it enough to keep reading it. So you don't really have that much of a problem with this type of writing. You understand the type of movie it is, that it's this huge, vast cinematic movie that needs to have writing that can somehow explain on the page how big and beautiful this movie is. But at the end here, they really put their foot on the gas. I would call this pedestal writing. It's sort of like, you've gotten this far with me, this is my victory lap. And that's what's happening here, good or bad, that's what's happening. And it is beautiful writing. It's more prose writing than what you would normally see in a screenplay. So let's get to it. Clouds roll by. The world below is very small now. Grainer is high in the sky in the biplane. He looks down at the fairgrounds as if from the clouds. It's glorious, though his stomach is somewhere else. So obviously a lot of that could be cut out, but there are several lines here that are very internalization, very like something you would read if you were reading the novella. Because you can't really act that your stomach is somewhere else. But we get the idea, like the plane's making him sick, making him dizzy. Then the Earth's surface turns sideways and he loses any sense of up and down. The craft rights itself and begins a slow, ratchety ascent, winding upward like a wagon around a mountain. So we get this thematic simile, like a wagon around the mountain. And that can be tied into the trains and what we've seen in the film and in the screenplay. Grainer is holding on to whatever he can. Just as he's getting accustomed to it all, the pilot, and this is interesting because the pilot is capital T, capital P, but not all caps, and not just lowercase. So I'm not sure why that happened. I'm sure there's a reason for it. The pilot yells at him from the seat behind him, shouting over the wind, double dash, resembling a raccoon in her cap and goggles. And this is fun because I saw in an interview, I think with Bentley, where he had said that there was other scripted lines here at the end in the plane, but that the pilot, who's a real pilot, obviously, stunt pilot, and was mic'd, said, "Hey, you better hold on to something." And Joel, the actor, says, "Huh?" And so that was left in the movie, as that often happens where people ad lib or say something and it works and it's great. You put it in the movie. What is less usual is that it ends up in the screenplay. So that means someone went back in the screenplay and put it in as dialogue in the screenplay. And, this was a 4-year consideration screenplay. It was nominated for an Oscar. It obviously was cleaned up and all that stuff that you have to do. So I'm sure that's probably when it happened. But isn't that fun? All right, then the plane starts to plummet. And we got starts to again in this hedge language. They fall out of the sky, steeper and steeper, the engine nearly silent. Grainer's organs push back against his spine, and his eyes softly close. So we've got the organs pushing back against the spine. That can't be filmed, but you get the idea. It's creating this feeling, this emotion. Then we get this cool paragraph of sound design. Then all sound is swept away except for the sound of the ocean in a seashell. That's symbolic. He experiences a series of dreamlets and memories from his life. And series of dreamlets and memories from his life is in all caps with a colon. I mean, these guys are good at coming up with different ways of saying series of shots, flashes, montage. Dreamlets, I like that. So now we've got two that we can do, right? We can do dreamlets and we can do, what was the other one? Snatches. Dreamlets and snatches. All right. And then there's a list here. They didn't use any sort of like dashes or dots or indentions or anything. They just go through it, which is fine. Easier for me to see with dashes, but I'm also doing it on the page here to show you there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 dreamlets. Also, sometimes a line is one thing, sometimes a line is multiple things. So maybe they probably didn't want this to stretch out over a page, so they combined some things. But let's go through them. A cabin he'd never remembered before, double dash, the place of his hidden childhood. Okay. Arms encircling him as a young boy, a woman's voice crooning. The day he proposed to Gladys. Kneeling on the cabin porch, offering a yellow flower to Kate. The memory sweetened with time. Boy, just thinking about little Kate breaks my heart. Other memories of Gladys and Kate jumbled together. He sees Ignatius Jack, Arn Peebles dying, taking in the world one last time. Stray dogs in the ashes of his cabin. A curtain moved softly by the breeze. A train passing in the night. The Chinese laborer, alive, still. A giant tree falling in the forest. A pair of old boots nailed to a tree. So he's taking us back to some of those earlier images and some new ones. Back in the biplane. So now we get again, I don't know what to call this. It's like a mini slug, except there's a period and it's not used consistently, but it is back in the plane, all caps, bold and underlined. And we are back in the plane. Grainier nearly passes out and all the mysteries of his life are answered. Then we get the narrator again. When Robert Grainer died in his sleep, sometime in November of 1968, his life ended as quietly as it had begun. So then we are no longer in the plane, but it doesn't say that. So this is where, if you were being consistent here, you would say, we're missing a mini slug. So you would say where we're going, which is the cabin, or back to the dreamlets or whatever. But it just leaves the narrator and it says, we see his cabin a few years from now, covered up in vines and weeds, seemingly forgotten. Covered up in vines and weeds is in all caps. Inside, he is dead. So this is another example of showing and telling. The narrator told us that he died. We're seeing this cabin and they tell us that he's dead. And then the first scene in the cabin, we're going to see his dead body. His body lays there in his bed. Vines and plants have overtaken his body such that he looks like a man mixed with a plant in the corner of the room. Boy, that is stunning visually. I love that writing. And as much as I adore this movie, I can't recall how it ends. All I remember is the plane. So do they go back and show his body taken over by nature? overrun by weeds and vines, sort of like the guy who just had the mouth hole in the beginning, to show that we all come from dirt and go to dirt. Maybe they did. But certainly in the screenplay. Then we get more information from the narrator. He'd never purchased a firearm or spoken into a telephone. He had no idea who his parents might have been, and he left no heirs behind him. That hurts a little bit. I mean, I really appreciate it. Then we also don't have a mini slug or anything here. We go back to the plane just like before, but we don't get the back in the biplane. We just go straight into it. The engine roars back to life and the present world materializes before his eyes again. Engine roars back to life, all caps. He takes a deep breath, relaxing now. And then we get the narrator one last time. But on that spring day, as he misplaced all sense of up and down, he felt, at last, connected to it all. The plane levels off, circles the fairground. Kwedar leans back his head, closes his eyes, and finds himself somewhere he has not been in a very long time. At peace. The end. So this is an example of putting your themes on a pedestal. You want to make sure that they got it. There is an argument for a little more restraint, letting the reader earn it themselves and have some ownership of it rather than spoon feeding them. But again, like I said, it is beautiful writing and it's a beautiful story. And it's a big, bold, grandiose story about life. So why not? I mean, it's sort of like the writing should reflect on the page what it's going to look like on the screen. So I think there's a brilliance to this, actually. I'm not saying you should spend 3 pages on your screenplay to spell out all the themes and get purple, but it works for these guys. That's for dang sure. All right, that's Train Dreams this week. There's so much more to it. So if you like that, I would get the screenplay and go through it. I mean, it's funny that we did the first 4 pages and the last 3 pages, and we didn't get a single line of dialogue from our main actor, our main character, Grainer. All right. You can find out what's going on with me on my socials. Easy to find. Also, if you listen to this, you could watch it on YouTube and see the pages I'm talking about, and vice versa. If you just want to pick it up while you're in the car or whatever, you can do that. Also, you can go to my website, jeff-barker.com, and see what's up with me. And of course, I got to remind you, May 15th, my son's movie is going to come out worldwide. It's going to be a banger. Obsession. Focus Features and Blumhouse are starting to really advertise for it. So I know you're starting to see it. Yep, it's that one. Go see it, please. Because you know how it is. That first week is so important. But either way, it doesn't matter. We're really proud of it. I'm proud of him. It's a great movie. So I hope you get to see it. Thanks for being with me. I'll see you next time.